Some creative teams move and some spin. And the difference usually has nothing to do with talent or tools. Today's episode argues that the answer lies in a mix that most leaders have never been taught to read. And if your team is missing one of these pieces, you can probably feel it every single week. Hey, I'm Luke, and here is another one of our training library releases as we prepare for SALT 2026 in Dallas, Texas this coming October. This is Darrel Girardier, Executive Director of Ministry at Brentwood Baptist, and he's going to name the types of creatives who show up on every church team and what happens to a team that weighed too heavily towards any one of them. Weigh it wrong, and the team either stops questioning itself or it stops finishing anything. Without further ado, here's Darrel. Take it away.
Hey everyone, my name is Darrel Girardier, and I serve as the Communications Director at Brentwood Baptist Church. And in this course, we're going to talk about how you go from chaos to clarity. How do we help your communications, creative, production team, whatever team you serve on at your church, how do we help you get from a chaotic environment to having real clarity? Now, when I started in my career, I had the wonderful, wonderful experience of building a creative team. Now, I worked at a company called Lifeway, and they basically gave me free reign to create my first ever creative team. Now, the cool thing about this team was we got to do a lot of stuff underground. When I say underground, we literally were in the underground of a massive building in downtown Nashville. And we got to go around and create all sorts of fun, creative things. We did videos for camp. We did videos for all of our live events. It was a creative time by which we had little oversight and a lot of creativity. In fact, in this image, you'll see somebody dressed as Batman being told by their project manager that they're late with their designs. You'll see an image right here of us in White Sands, New Mexico, filming on federal property without a film permit because, hey, we were young, we were dumb. We didn't know you needed one of those things. It was an absolute wonderful time of building a creative team. However, that time kind of came to an end. And in fact, I can remember the moment when we got ourselves a little bit in hot water. We got called to the CEO's office of the company, and he wanted to know what it was like as a millennial to work at this publishing company. So we thought it was going to be a nice chat. He thought it was going to be a nice chat, and that nice chat quickly went south because he started asking us questions, but we turned the questions back around on him, and we started asking him questions about our finances. What's the vision for the company? What are we going to do with the fact that we have Amazon breathing down our throats? Well, that conversation did not go well. In fact, I didn't know how well it didn't go until he published the book on millennials, and we were at the beginning story of chapter 6 of his book on millennials. It was at that point I started to realize I had to think really hard about how I create teams, because we had basically kind of just carried ourselves through to this new world and this new age of so new technology, all the stuff around us. And I had to really start thinking about how we create teams, because I felt like to a certain degree, we just fell into this great creative team. But I knew if I was going to grow as a leader, I had to figure out how we build really good creative teams. Because here's the thing about working in a church environment. It's the part that nobody wants to tell you. They like to use these metaphors like, you know what? All you got to do is get the right people on the right bus going in the same direction. Okay? And that's true, unless you work at a church. Because if you work at a church, you're not doing that. You are literally flying an airplane, but you're building the airplane at the same time while you're flying it. Because it's always chaotic. Because guess what? Sunday's coming every single week. So how do you build a creative team? And then how do you put processes, standards, things in place to help you structure your team to be sustainable and scalable? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So first I want to talk about the type of people you bring on your team. The 4 different types of creatives that you bring on a creative communications or any production team, for that matter, at your church. So let's start with this. I want you to imagine a 4x4 grid. In fact, you'll see one here on the screen. And on that 4x4 grid, we're going to put at the top what we call externally driven. Externally driven basically means you are driven by people asking you to do stuff. So if I ask you to do something for me, you have no problem executing on that. Okay. You are driven by the fact you want people to tell you what to do, or you really thrive off of people telling you what to do. Then on the other side, we're going to put something called eternally driven, not eternal like eternal life, internally driven, okay? In other words, you choose something to do for yourself and you're going to do it. So in other words, if you create New Year's resolutions and you have no problem following through, you probably have really good internal drive, okay? So on that 2x2 grid, all right, as my team likes to joke, I describe everything in the world by either a Venn diagram or a 2x2 grid. So in this 2x2 grid, we're going to put low and high on each of the categories. So you're going to have people that are, say, highly externally driven and also highly internally driven. We're going to have people that are high internal driven, but low externally driven. People that are high external, low internal, and the people that are low external and actually low internally driven. And this model actually comes from Gretchen Rubin's book, The Four Tendencies, which I really encourage you to check out. Now, let's go to that top quadrant. These are people, this is the type of creative that is high externally driven and high internally driven. Okay, so they're high external and high internal. Okay, the person I like to use as an example of this is Amy Poehler's character from Parks and Rec. Okay, Leslie Knope. She is the kind of person that wakes up with notebooks full of ideas and she's ready to go. I like to say this category of person, they wake up every single morning and they ask a couple of questions. One question is, what are we going to get done today? And two, why can't you move as fast as I can move? Because they are type A and they are driven and they are going to get things done. This is the type of person in your church most likely who gets promoted the quickest, because we see them as a type of leader that is a productive, get it done type of leader that you can count on. So this is the type of person that, again, moves of the organization because they're seen as very, very type A. We're going to get things done. That is wonderful for a church. They're phenomenal at getting things done. However, just like there's a strong side, there's a weak side of that person. One of the weak sides of them is they can be very high strung. They can be very much like, my way, the highway, we got to get things done. If you don't do it the way I want it, then we're going to have a problem. So while they are wonderful at getting things done, the downside is they can be very high strung and can have high demands of not just themselves, but everyone else around them. Now, let's go to the bottom right quadrant. Those are people that are high externally driven, but low internally driven. And that basically means they'll do something for you, but they don't always do something for themselves. The character I like to use from this is Pam from The Office. Pam served everybody else, but if you ever watch that TV show, she served everybody else, but she doesn't go to like design school, art school, something that she wanted to do until like way into like season 4, 5, or 6, I believe. See, these people tend to think of others first. They wake up every morning going, how can I help you? Not so much, how can I help myself? And these type of people, we typically put in administrative roles. We typically put in support roles. It doesn't mean they can't be leaders. A lot of people can be leaders, but they have a tendency to want to first serve you versus serving themselves, okay? The thing about these type of people is, what I love about them is that they're wonderful at just greasing the wheels of an organization and getting things done. They're wonderful to have around in terms of good, proper support. However, the downside is you can pile too much on this type of creative. This is the type of creative that just honestly, you just like a wood chipper, you just keep feeding them stuff and they just know they're going to consume it. The problem is at some point they eventually snap. They snap because we give them way too much work. So we got to be careful when you have this type of creative in the room, is that they'll just constantly accept things and they're not realizing, oh my gosh, I've taken on too much, and eventually they just start to break. So we would need to be careful of that when you have that type of creative on your team. Now let's go to the upper left quadrant. This is the type of person that is highly internally driven, but low externally driven. The character I use for this, and yes, I know it's a little bit dated, is George Costanza from Seinfeld. All right. These are people that wake up every morning going, what can I get done for myself? I'm not really going to do so much for you. It's not that they don't like helping people. The reality is that they will do things for you and your team, but they first want to make sure it aligns with their internal values. Their internal values, what they value, comes first and foremost. So what happens is when you have these type of people on your team, you can start to kind of get annoyed by them. They can kind of start to wear things down because they're the person in the creative process who's constantly asking the question, should we be doing this? Is this really the best thing for us? And they can kind of almost come a little bit annoying. And people are like, oh my gosh, we can't get anything done because person over there constantly keep raising their hand, constantly keep asking questions if that's the best thing for our team. The reality of it is a good leader is going to understand that you actually have to have those people in the room, because those people are making sure that what you're doing is actually the most effective thing. It's actually really what matters. So while they may make a lot of noise and they may feel like they're slowing you down, they keep you aligned with your church's mission and vision. So just be aware of that when you're working with somebody who falls in that quadrant. Now, we get to the last quadrant. And this is the quadrant that's the bottom. This is low internal, low external. They're not doing anything for anybody, not even themselves. So here's the thing about this quadrant. We typically kind of go, well, why in the world would you ever want to work with somebody who's like that? Here's something I've learned throughout my time in leadership, is that these are typically your most creative people. But they come with a massive trade-off. And that is they cannot hit a deadline to save their lives. I love them to death. All the people that fall in this bucket that I work with, this is exactly how the process goes. We'll set a deadline. We've got a project. We meet the deadline. Everybody comes to the table with their creative work except for that person. They're like, oh, I forgot about it. It wasn't in the mood. I was thinking about this. I got lost on this. I was doing this. And all of a sudden you're kind of going, dude, when are you going to actually give me the work? Then like 2 to 3 days roll by after we're way into production, like we're done. And they show up with their work and their work is amazing. It's like, gosh, if we had that 3 days ago, it's like the most brilliant work you've ever seen. And what happens for a lot of these folks is they can get away with being tardy. They can get away with missing meetings because their work is so good and they're so brilliantly creative. In fact, the funny thing is when I actually did this with my creative team, my one rebel on the team forgot about the meeting that we're having to talk about this. Why? Because inspiration struck him and he decided to go to Home Depot to work on a completely different project that wasn't due for a while. So they're super creative often, but the reality of it is they tend to not know what's going on around them because they tend to not be motivated by internal and external. Here's one trick I would tell you when you're working with this type of person, because you probably more than likely have one of them, a volunteer or production team member that fits this category. How you get them out of that mode where they're not really internally, externally driven is you have to explain to them the consequences of them missing deadlines and how it affects the team and how it affects the church. Once you do that, more often than not, they can get pulled out of that. Now, here's another fun fact about this quadrant. This quadrant is where a lot of your pastors are. Now, I know I may get lit up on the internet for saying that, but the reality of it is I've talked to a lot of creative leaders, and when I talk about their pastor, a lot of the pastors fit in that category. So you may be asking, well, why do pastor fit in that category? Because a lot of them are really great communicators. They're phenomenal at preaching and teaching God's word, but they really aren't good at all the other stuff. So they're really good about having that one deadline they've got to do. I like to say the gospel is so compelling. It pulls them out of that low internal, low external drive, and it gives them something to focus on and aim for. And that's why they can deliver every single Sunday. So those are the 4 different types of creatives that you would have on your creative or production team. Now, here's the thing you need to know. Typically in organizations, we ideally would say, well, hey, when I look at that 2x2 grid, I'm just going to hire everybody on the right side. And that's my Leslie Nopes or my Pams of the world. Why? Because I just want people who are either going to support me or either people who are going to get things done. And that, in theory, makes sense. However, I want you to think of more of this like a recipe. Like you need lots of different ingredients to make the creative process work. You also need to think through your church's culture. So are you a church that's very conservative and doesn't like people ruffling feathers and just, at the end of the day, we want to be consistent and get things done? Then yeah, you'd hire people on the right side of that. But are you a church that's very fast moving, high creative, you tend to pivot a lot? Then you're going to need people that fall in the different quadrants. You're going to need those rebels, the person in the bottom left corner who basically can come up with some really really wild creative ideas. You're gonna need that person in the other quadrant who questions things all the time. Why? Because most likely, if you're a church that pivots a lot, you have mission and vision drift a lot. Your pastor's got an idea over here, they've got an idea over here, this new creative leader's got this idea over here. You need somebody who constantly asks the question, time out, is that really part of our mission and vision? So you kind of you need them to kind of help realign what you're doing as a team. So those are the 4 different types of creatives. Again, you want to do this based off of what your team is composed of and what your organizational culture is composed of. One more trick before we move on is I have found when you're building a creative team and you look at those 4 different types, you can have a lot of people in the upper right quadrant, a lot of those people that just get stuff done, a lot of the people that are support. You can even have a lot of questioners, and that's fine. I would say this, if you're going to have somebody in that bottom left quadrant, the person who shows up late but delivers quality content, you get to have 1 to 2 on your team. Any more than that, and you're going to be in trouble because you're not going to get a lot done on time, and people are going to be coming to you as a leader with a pitchfork, wondering why things are not getting done.
Sustainable creativity comes from a leader who knows who's actually on the team. I want you to do this week. Take a stab at mapping your own team against Darrel's types and see where you may have holes. See what's worth uncovering, and hopefully level up everyone on your creative team in the process. Don't forget, you can get that full course at saltcommunity.com, and we would love to see you and your team this fall in Dallas at SALT 2026 conference. For more details, go to salt2026.com. That's it. That's the pod.